Hello, and welcome to another Wheel of Time diary. I believe this is the fifth one now for The Fires of Heaven, book 5 of the series. If I'm incorrect in that count, I apologize. Sometimes it's easy to lose track after you've done about 4 of them. I believe this is the fifth one, because I think I have 2 more left to go after this before I'm done, making the total 7 for this book. This week went pretty good. I got basically the same amount of reading done as I did in my best week previously, which was the second week. So just under 6 hours of reading in, which could have been more if I read today, but I have another reading project that I actually need to get done because of a time related reasons. So I'm having to work on that this week, and so won't be able to read this in my free time over the course of the week. So I'm actually recording this a couple days earlier than normal, while the memories are still fresh in my head, since I know I won't get any extra things done. I read, I think, 12 chapters this week, chapters 29 through 40. So yeah, 12 chapters. Pretty hype on all of it. Only 2 major storylines to cover instead of having 3 major sections like I did last week, despite last week's reading being a little bit shorter. This time, I only have 2. I have Rand's plotline to cover a few chapters of with some pretty cool stuff in it. And then I have, of course, Nynaeve's and Elaine's plotline to cover a few chapters of. Although, is the Nynaeve plotline only from Nynaeve's POV in this go around? I think it might just be in Nynaeve's POV this go around, and that's it. So not actually as much to cover, strangely enough, despite reading quite a bit more. How I felt about this week's reading was pretty good, but I think probably the most rocky of any of my weeks of reading with this book so far. Had some really great stuff, but also had I think the closest that I got to being legitimately irritated with something in it as well. Rand's plotline was pretty good. Even the other plotline going on at the moment was pretty decent as well, with Nynaeve and whatnot. But I think I did have my first moment where I was like, okay, I see why people get actually really annoyed with her in this book, because there are very specific moments with her and one other character specifically that I was like, not sure I really needed that. Didn't bring me down too much on my thoughts, but were a couple of the moments where I first realized that maybe I could see myself getting actually irritated with this. And then there was also generally just the fact that one of the plot lines feels like it's going to be a tiny bit long in the tooth. Maybe not by too much, because the plot line won't be returning for 80 pages or more, and then it will be relatively short when it does reappear, and that should be the end of that plot line in this book. So it shouldn't be that much of a problem, but I am looking slightly wary at it in the future over these last couple weeks of reading. I did really enjoy what I read. Like I said, some pretty crazy stuff, so let's just jump right into the normal spoiler talk. I'm going to discuss chapters 29 through 32, it looks like. That will be the portion of Rand's plotline that got covered this week, so just 4 chapters. And actually, I did unintentionally lie about this. Chapter 29 isn't Rand's POV. It is a little bit of a break in between the POVs, but does take place with, Rand's whole group of Aiel and the whole posse following him, essentially. It is from Kedir's POV. I hope that's how his name is pronounced. A character that, was kind of very intermittent, very minor to the Shadow Rising, and hasn't really appeared besides a couple name mentions, I believe, so far in this book. But in this chapter, became a very terrifying character when you realize that he is actually a pretty severe level of Dark Friend, which, makes sense because these were the people traveling with Lanfear and Asmodean when they were disguised, although granted they didn't know that it was Lanfear and Asmodean disguised, but Lanfear is revealed in this chapter to have disappeared as her disguised character, like she did in, at the end of Shadow Rising, and then came back to Kedir as Lanfear to give him more orders. So interesting bad guy politics stuff going on there. But the main takeaway from this chapter is that Kedir is a very high level of Dark Friend who, in this chapter, it actually reveals killed his own sister, I guess, after she discovered his Dark Friend allegiances, and he just straight up kills Ascendre, the woman who's been trying to bed Rand this whole time. He kills her when she essentially implies and reveals that she has been broken in her attempts to get to Rand, because part of what Kadir's trying to do is get information about Rand through somebody close to him. The attempt is to get a woman to bed with him, because a man will always reveal secrets that he wouldn't reveal to anybody else to the woman that he beds. So like, kind of abrupt stuff in this chapter, shockingly violent in some sense, and took me a little bit by surprise, but it was certainly effective. I'm now worried about his character moving forward, since he is kind of part of this whole brigade, as well as, you know, what his future attempts to get at Rand might look like. Pretty concerning to say the least. But chapters 30 through 32 were actually Rand's POV. Chapter 30 didn't really have a whole lot happening. It was mostly just a look into, you know, how different the wetlander ways, I'll say, are perceived by the Aiel, and especially like Rand's personal group when they're talking with him. After spending so much time in the Waste with these characters in the plotline, like, you kind of realize just how different some of those behaviors and whatnot are. But it was fun to also see Rand's views and understandings, how some of the way that he interprets the world that he once lived in compared to how he does now. Pretty interesting stuff to look at, and also makes it fun to look forward to what will eventually happen with Rand once he reaches the Shido clan, and, you know, what battles might occur there while in Carrion. So, you know, not a whole lot that happened in the chapter with Meat, but like a lot of interesting paths in which you can take your thoughts, interesting paths to follow in thought, I suppose you could say. Chapters 31 and 32, however, were the more interesting chapters, with some pretty strange stuff that happened, all things considered. First off, Rand walking in on Aviendha trying to bathe herself was already something in and of itself, but in her desperate attempt to flee, Rand, in her embarrassment, I suppose you could say, she desperately makes a gateway. So a gateway with the power to the middle of a blizzard, in the middle of nowhere. They have no idea where. That Rand somehow manages to stop the closing of this gateway and chase her through the storm, and like this entire chapter 31 is about Rand chasing her. The scene was very well done with the chase sequence, and then Aviendha breaking through ice in a river that Rand has to pull her out of. Rand insulting himself as well for, you know, causing this to happen in some sense, but also trying to force himself to get Aviendha out of the river, just like the way that a man, or a person, I suppose, would berate themselves when they're trying to do something and not doing a very good job of it in the moment, is really well written, I would say. And then, especially, I would say, Rand's magic garnering a shelter for the two of them while he tries to warm her up and unfreeze her, essentially. Pretty nice depictions of the magic in this chapter. And then, I would say this was actually a not poorly written love scene. Like, the actual lovemaking in this scene, in this chapter, after Aviendha wakes up, obviously, this was a consensual event. The writing of it was actually pretty good. The scene itself wasn't really on the page, but the before and after essentially were treated in such a way that I was actually kind of surprised. Jordan obviously gets a lot of flack for the way that he writes characters, most especially women, and the way that he writes romances. And this chapter was, I'm not gonna lie, actually not one of those moments that I feel like is worthy of being heavily criticized. It was not done in poor faith at all, in my opinion, and I think it was actually surprisingly well done. Like, it just worked. I didn't feel like it was awkward or unnecessary. In fact, it like creates a whole new dynamic between Rand and Aviendha's character, which will create a whole new, you know, kind of a dynamic between Rand and Min and Elaine, and like kind of all of these characters all together, that I think will probably be a relatively major thing throughout a good chunk of the series, probably, if not the remainder of it. So like, it was handled pretty well is what I'm trying to say. Chapter 32, when they, you know, are done and they decide that like, hey, yeah, maybe we should leave and get back to the others, like, how are we going to do that? Rand, because of the tied off power that he used to keep the gateway that Aviendha opened from closing, he knows how to get back to the gateway, so they do that. And it turns out that where Aviendha transported them to in the first place was Shan-Chan, which was not a revelation that I was expecting to occur, and also heavily concerning, especially since the group of Shan-Chan that is basically right at the portal that they encounter includes some that, or at least one that was at Falma, Falma. I think that's how it's pronounced. I think I remember that being how it's pronounced. Basically, the climax of the Great Hunt. So some of the Shan from earlier in the series are here. So again, concerning stuff. I'm cool to see that this is coming back to some degree, and I'm looking forward to see how it continues to come back and how it continues to move forward in the future as well. And of course, when Rand and Aviendha make it actually back to, make it back through the gateway, I learn a little bit about Asmodean, like kind of by implication. He was able to turn the gateway invisible, I think was the proper understanding of it, so that like other people who might have come into Rand's room would not notice the gateway. So like pretty good decision on that part to kind of hide that from happening, and also make it, I think, so that the Shan also didn't see the portal as well on the other side. So like Rand could see it and Rand could interact with it because he tied off the weaving of magic that kept the gateway open in the first place. Like complicated magic stuff essentially was kind of cool to read in this chapter. So like, I'm excited to see what more comes from this storyline, and where I have stopped now, like, goes back into the storyline. And like I said, it lasts for quite a while, so I'm going to be reading Rand POV once I start reading again this weekend. So I'm excited for that. Otherwise, let's move on to the Nynaeve plotline, the Circus plotline in chapters 33 through 40. So quite a bit of it. I think that's 8 chapters total of this plotline. Some pretty good stuff to move through, some just kind of normal stuff to move through. For all intents and purposes, my reading of this plotline as well could be separated into 2 sections. So we're going to go through the first half of that, chapters 33 through 36, which featured Nynaeve essentially returning to Tel'aran'rhiod to meet with Barragət, with some pretty crazy events happening, some pretty crazy revelations. Barragət was able to locate not just Moghedien, but also the rest of the Forsaken who have been meeting in Tel'aran'rhiod. I don't know if Moghedien kind of revealed that she knew that this was happening, but she does, take herself away from that meeting. And let's back up just a tiny bit. Barragət discovers these meetings and is able to spy on them for a little bit. And so when she meets Nynaeve in Tel'aran'rhiod, she takes Nynaeve to see one of these meetings for just a brief moment, and then takes her away. She's like, okay, yeah, but I don't like staying around too long, because if any of them look up, they see us because of the way that the void that they enter to witness the meetings exists. Anyway, Moghedien did know that they were there, and actually comes to them now in this moment, and dang near kills Barragət, and threatens Nynaeve immensely, but Barragət, because she's not dead, is actually able to fire an arrow into Moghedien to stop her. She's injured now, like she has to go back to the real world and get healed basically immediately, so she's not able to do anything with Nynaeve. So like, pretty crazy stuff that just happened in a couple of these chapters. But more importantly, when Nynaeve returns to Barragət after she saved her life, Barragət disappears. Like, she kind of like dies essentially. Mildly concerning. And the next chapter, I guess, was actually an Elaine POV, chapter 35, I think. Maybe it was 36. Either way, in my panic from Barragət getting, killed in Tel'aran'rhiod, she reappears in the real world in Tom and Sandar's room, who immediately bring her to Nynaeve and Elaine, and they're like, oh, we know who she is. She's alive. Okay. And like, they're trying to keep her from dying because she's dying, and the only way that Elaine manages to keep Barragət from dying is by bonding her as a warder. So like, interesting decision there. That's kind of a weird relationship I also did not see coming. A lot of crazy stuff that I didn't see coming in this book, so that's pretty fun and dandy. And it also all has pretty questionable and strange implications for how Barragett's legends, as well as that of her mate, I forget his name off the top of my head, Guidal, I hope that's his name if I'm remembering it. These two, their legends, they're being reborn throughout the legends, and how they always love each other, and how they always manage to find each other and create this kind of relationship together. And like I said, their legend, how this specific rebirthing of Barragett in the real world is going to affect those legends is kind of an interesting question that I have now, and looking forward to seeing more from. The chapter 36, A New Name, was very fun, all things considered, because of Barragett being in the real world and the way that they just kind of have to do things, and now like she's a new part of the circus as well. She was able to put on a show for Luca, showing that she was very good with the bow, and like Luca wants to call her Birgit for the purpose of the show, but like Moghedien knows that they're at a circus now, which I forgot to mention from a couple chapters ago when she was... Anyway, Moghedien knows that they are in a circus of some sort. Doesn't know exactly where, but like she knows where some circuses are, so like they have a pretty good way to be able to find them, potentially. And just having a performer named Birgit would be like problem. So like they give Birgit a new name for the chapter. I don't remember what that name was. I didn't write it down, but like really cool stuff. Just I'm really loving the book at this point. But then we move into basically the second half of what happens in this plot line, which is a little bit more focused on Nynaeve personally, because in chapter 37 like there's like performance stuff with Elaine and Sandar and Birgit and all that other stuff that's like pretty fun, but you know, nothing too super crazy important. It just kind of happens. What is important is that in the midst of like the circus like actually performing stuff for people now, is that Nynaeve finds Uno from back in the Great Hunt. I think, I don't remember if he was in Dragon Reborn. I think he was, but I don't remember like what the specific circumstances behind him splitting up with the rest of the group, the other people, was. So, but either way, Nynaeve does encounter Uno down here at the circus, which was interesting. She manages to get him to take her to the Prophet, as he is called, in man, what's the place in Samara? So like just you know, a few miles away from where all the circuses are located. Bold move on Nynaeve's part, but they head into Sandar to speak with this guy, with Massima, I guess is his name, with the Prophet. It seems to go both poorly and well for Nynaeve because of different constraints to agreements. Like Nynaeve wants to get on a riverboat and like head away from this place as soon as possible because, well, Moghedien knows they're in a circus now, so she doesn't want to hang around in circus. So she petitions Massima for for a boat to transport her and Elaine and like a few other people, and somehow gets agreement that the Prophet will look for one, but like she doesn't know if it'll happen. But then when she and Uno are traveling back to the circus, it turns out they're being followed by a white cloak, and that white cloak happens to be, whoop-de-doo, it's Galad. And the meeting that happens here was just really kind of fun, like a really great negotiating process with Galad between, you know, him and Nynaeve, and then also Uno and one other guy, I forget his name, another person, another Shienarn soldier, just kind of accompanying her back. And like I said, these negotiations were really good. Nynaeve coming up to an agreement with Galad that went shockingly well, that he is going to try to find them a boat to transport them, but then all the Shienarn soldiers also agree that they're going to have like a whole posse of like a dozen of them, you know, kind of agree to side with Nynaeve and Elaine and try to protect them. So like there's going to be more protectors there. Galad, instead of turning them into the White Cloaks, is going to try to help them escape under the condition that they go to Caemlyn, but like Nynaeve never promised she would go to Caemlyn, so like who knows what's going to happen there. Just a lot of sort of like quasi-political type of negotiating. General talking in the chapter was really good, even when Nynaeve returns to the circus and is actually able to talk with Elaine and all of them about it. Just like, yeah, I was able to talk to Galad and like he's going to agree to help us and we might be out of here in a couple days kind of thing. And then of course the show that Nynaeve has to put on as being like the target for Birgit to shoot arrows at. Fun times happens at the very end of the chapter and traumatizes Nynaeve, which I just found to be funny, but like all really cool stuff. I can see why some people might get irritated by this circus plot seeming like it's a little overlong. Doesn't seem like fully necessary to be as long as it is, but like at the same time, basically the entire time that the circus has existed in this book, it hasn't been like the setting or the point. There have been a couple chapters where this has been the thing, like the back half of chapter 40 here. There was a few chapters earlier where it was like the thing, but like it also wasn't like super important. It's more like a mechanism for which certain character interactions and meetings and other certain specific events occur rather than being like the purpose of the book. And every time that most of this plotline has been set in Teleron Riyadh. More of it has been set in Teleron Riyadh than the circus by far. So like, I don't see what people's problem is. And all the Teleron Riyadh stuff, for the record, is really good, and the circus stuff isn't bad. I mean, we'll see when the next time this Elaine Nynaeve POV happens, but like, I can't see the circus or lasting for the entirety of the next time their plotline reappears, somewhere near the end of the book, or at least like it'll be finished by the end of the book. And I don't have very much left. I'm 2/3 of the way through, so I'm not too concerned about it, is basically what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that was my reading for the week. Sorry for a somewhat less coherent diary this time. I thought it would be a decent bit shorter because I didn't really have as much to discuss, but then I just kind of rambled on about stuff, as I usually do. But like I said, I'm 2/3 of the way through. I have right around 230 pages left in the book. I'm going to try to get through a good large chunk of that this weekend, and then should only have a little bit left for the weekend after that. So I think 2 more diaries of this will happen the next couple Thursdays. Maybe I'll be able to get it done a week early, but I highly doubt it. Just based off of my reading speed, I'll probably get through. If I were to guess, I will probably be up to chapter 51, I guess, when I come back, just kind of based off of where approximate POVs are kind of split, just looking at some of the names that occur in some of the chapters randomly. So it seems like this next Rand POV and the next Nynaeve POV, well, I guess these plot lines, the next Circus plotline portion and the next Rand plotline portion together will last about 140 pages, and reading that in one weekend will be a little bit rough going depending on how things go. So that's what I'm going to shoot for, is reaching chapter 51 for the next diary, and then I'll cover, of course, the last 80 or so pages the week after that. So, you know, that'll be fun. If you've been watching these videos and you've been enjoying them, I appreciate you for sticking around, even for the rambly bits that don't really seem to make any coherent sense, even though when I edit them they always make more sense than I think they do. So, you know, let me know if I'm doing a good job or not. I hope I am, and I certainly try to, but I'll see you guys next week for probably a very big diary, because it'll be covering a lot of pages. See you then.